She closed his garage with a red notice and a clean signature, but she did not understand that some men do not lose everything when a door is locked in front of them. By 8:57 on Monday morning, Ethan Walker was holding his daughter's lunchbox in one hand and the key to Walker Auto Repair in the other when he saw the black SUVs parked across the cracked concrete apron of his garage. They did not belong on Maple Industrial Road, not beside the faded tire shop, not across from the storage units with peeling blue doors, and definitely not in front of the one-bay garage with the hand-painted sign his wife had helped him hang 8 years earlier. Lily walked beside him in her yellow rain boots even though the sky was clear, carrying the small plastic tool kit she insisted was for important jobs only. She was 7 years old, quiet in the mornings, with pale blonde hair tucked behind one ear and a habit of watching her father's face before deciding whether the world was safe. Ethan stopped before she did. The first thing he noticed was the paper on the door, bright red against the dusty glass. The second thing he noticed was Claire Whitmore standing 10 feet away from it in a cream-colored coat that had no business being near motor oil. Her heels were planted on his concrete like she owned the ground beneath it, which, according to the folder in the hand of the man beside her, she now believed she did. Grant Keller, her operations director, was already smoothing the notice flat with the side of his palm, careful not to get dust on his cuff. Ethan said nothing. He looked past them through the window at the workbench, the old radio, the half-finished Chevy transmission covered with a clean cloth, and the framed photograph of his wife on the shelf above the compressor. Claire turned when she heard Lily's lunchbox tap softly against Ethan's leg. Her eyes moved over his gray work shirt, the grease that never fully left the cracks around his knuckles, the worn boots, the little girl beside him, and then back to the garage as if the building explained the man completely. "Mr. Walker," she said, calm enough to sound bored, "this property is now under Whitmore Automotive Control. Your lease violation has been reviewed. The structure is unsafe, the business is non-compliant, and this location is being cleared for redevelopment." Grant gave a small smile without showing his teeth. A tow truck idled near the curb, waiting for instructions. Ethan looked at the notice. Then he looked at Claire. "My tools are inside," he said. "You'll be allowed to schedule supervised removal," Claire replied. "Not today." Lily's fingers tightened around the handle of her plastic tool kit. Ethan felt it without looking down. Claire stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel personal without sounding improper. "This place has been dead for years," she said. "I'm just making it official." The words settled on the concrete between them. Across the street, a man from the tire shop stopped rolling a wheel and watched. 2 delivery drivers slowed near the curb. Ethan could feel the small audience forming, the way people always appeared when someone else's life was being folded into a file. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask Claire if she knew what that garage had cost him, or how many nights he had worked until 2 a.m. with Lily asleep on a vinyl chair under his jacket, or how many families on that side of town came to him because the dealerships charged more than they could survive. He only reached into his pocket, removed the brass key, and held it for 1 second longer than necessary. Lily looked up at him. "Dad," she asked softly, "are we still going to fix cars?" Ethan closed his hand around the key. He looked at the red notice, then at the old sign above the door, its white letters sun-faded but still readable. Walker Auto Repair. Honest work. Fair price. His wife had painted the last line herself. "Not here," he said. Claire heard him and mistook the quiet for defeat. That was her first mistake. By 9 in the morning, the garage was closed. By winter, Claire Whitmore would stand inside an old factory on the edge of the city, surrounded by machines running under Ethan Walker's name, and realize she had not shut down a business. She had opened the door to an empire. The drive home did not feel like a drive at all. It felt like a long hallway Ethan Walker had to walk down while carrying every part of his life that still mattered. Lily sat in the back seat with her plastic tool kit on her lap and her lunchbox beside her, watching the garage shrink in the side mirror until the red notice became a small square of color and then nothing. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel. He did not turn on the radio. He did not call Mason Reed. He did not let himself look at the envelope Grant Keller had handed him before leaving, because he already knew what kind of paper powerful people used when they wanted ordinary people to feel small. At the stoplight near Franklin Avenue, Lily asked if Miss Claire was mad at them. Ethan looked at her in the mirror. Her face was serious in the way children's faces become serious when they are trying to understand adult trouble without making it worse. "No," he said. "She does not know us well enough to be mad." Lily thought about that, then looked down at the little plastic wrench in her hand. Then why did she take the garage? Ethan watched the light turn green. For a moment, he could hear his wife's voice in the quiet space beside him, telling him not to give a child more weight than she could carry. "Because some people think a place is only worth what it says on a report," he said. "And some places are worth more than that." Lily nodded as if she understood, though Ethan knew she did not fully. Maybe that was mercy. Their house sat 12 minutes from the garage, a small white rental at the end of a narrow street lined with maple trees and tired mailboxes. It had 2 bedrooms, a porch step that leaned slightly to the left, and a kitchen table Ethan had repaired twice instead of replacing. He parked in the driveway and sat there for a second too long. Lily unbuckled herself, climbed out, and waited for him without being asked. That was what made it harder. She had learned patience too early. Inside, the house still smelled faintly of toast from breakfast and the lavender detergent his wife used to buy before Ethan started choosing whatever was cheapest at the grocery store. On the refrigerator was Lily's school calendar, a spelling test, marked in blue marker, and an old photograph of Ethan, Lily, and Nora Walker standing in front of the garage on the day they painted the sign. Nora had been smiling with paint on her wrist. Ethan had been younger then, though not by many years. Grief had a way of adding age without asking permission. He set Lily's lunchbox on the counter and finally opened Grant's envelope. 3 pages. Legal language. Compliance failure. Immediate possession. Removal window pending approval. It was clean, complete, and heartless in the way paperwork could be when no one signing it had to stand in the room afterward. Lily climbed onto a chair and watched him. "Are you going to call somebody?" she asked. "Not yet." "Are you sad?" Ethan folded the papers once, then again, lining the corners carefully. "A little." "Are you scared?" He looked at her then. He could have lied. Parents did that sometimes out of love, but Ethan had never believed children needed perfect fathers. They needed honest ones who did not fall apart in front of them. "Yes," he said. "But scared is not finished." Lily held that answer like it was something useful. Then she slid off the chair, walked to the hallway closet, and came back carrying the folded shop towel Nora used to keep in the garage, the one with faded blue stitching along the edge. Ethan had brought it home months ago to wash and never returned it. Lily placed it beside the papers. "Mom would say we need a new plan," she said. Ethan put his hand on the towel, feeling the old cotton under his palm, and for the first time that morning, the silence did not feel empty. It felt like a bench before work began. He took out his phone and found Mason Reed's number. He did not know where the next door was. He only knew he could not let his daughter believe one locked door was the end of a man. Claire Whitmore did not think about Ethan Walker again until 11:30 that morning, and even then, only because Grant Keller placed a folder on the conference table with his name printed on the tab. The boardroom on the 32nd floor of Whitmore Automotive overlooked downtown through a wall of blue glass, the kind of view that made traffic, repair shops, storage yards, and tired neighborhoods look small enough to manage. Claire sat at the head of the table with a silver pen in her hand, listening as Grant moved through the redevelopment update with the calm efficiency of a man who enjoyed clean lines and closed problems. On the screen behind him was a map of Maple Industrial Road. Most of the parcels were marked in green. One small rectangle near the south corner had been crossed out in red. Walker Auto Repair. Claire looked at it for less than 2 seconds. "Possession completed?" she asked. Completed at 9:06 this morning, Grant said. No incident. No press. No city involvement beyond the existing notice. A junior executive near the far side of the table nodded as if this was impressive. Claire accepted it the same way she accepted weather reports, financial summaries, and legal clearances. Useful information, nothing more. The Maple Corridor project was supposed to become Whitmore Automotive's new regional service center, a polished complex with customer lounges, electric vehicle bays, glass offices, and enough corporate language around innovation to satisfy investors who liked that sort of thing. The old businesses along the road did not fit the rendering. They never had. A tire shop, a storage yard, 2 machine sheds, a one-bay garage with a faded sign. Claire had not built her company by becoming sentimental about buildings that could not scale. Her father had taught her that land was either working for you or waiting to be corrected. She believed that. It had made her rich before 40. It had made Whitmore Automotive one of the fastest-growing dealership networks in the Midwest. It had also made her very good at mistaking silence for weakness. Grant clicked to the next slide. There is one minor exposure, he said. Claire raised her eyes. Grant's face did not change, but his right thumb tapped once against the remote. Walker has 30 days to remove personal property. After that, anything remaining can be disposed of under the lease terms. Will he contest? Asked Marlene Price from legal. Grant gave a soft breath that almost became a laugh. He can try. He is a local mechanic with one employee on paper, no outside counsel, and 3 late compliance responses in the last 18 months. Claire turned the pen between her fingers. Were the violations valid? Marlene asked. Grant answered before Claire could. Documented and sufficient. It was not quite the same thing, but no one in the room slowed down long enough to notice. Claire leaned back. She remembered Ethan then, not clearly, but in pieces. The gray shirt. The child with the lunchbox. The way he had looked at the notice instead of at her, as if the paper deserved more attention than the person who brought it. Some men shouted when they lost. Some begged. Some performed dignity because they had nothing else left to perform. Ethan had done none of those things. He had simply stood there, quiet enough to make the morning feel colder than it was. For one brief moment, Claire wondered whether she had underestimated how much the place meant to him. Then Grant moved to the next slide, showing projected revenue from the service center, and the thought disappeared beneath cleaner numbers. Timeline? She asked. Demolition prep begins after the removal window, Grant said. Full clearing in 6 weeks. Claire nodded. Good. Keep it quiet. I do not want a human interest story about a small garage slowing a $60 million project. Around the table, people wrote that down in different ways. Keep it quiet. Manage optics. Proceed. No one wrote the simpler truth. They had taken a man's livelihood before lunch and called it progress. At 12:15, Claire left the boardroom for a call with investors, and Grant stayed behind long enough to close the file himself. He did not like loose ends. He especially did not like men like Ethan Walker, men who knew how machines sounded when something was wrong. Years earlier, before Claire trusted him with operations, Grant had learned that the most dangerous people in any company were not the loud ones. They were the quiet ones who noticed details. He slipped Ethan's folder into his leather case instead of sending it to records. On Claire's map, Walker Auto Repair was gone. In Grant's hands, Ethan Walker was not gone enough. By the time Mason Reed called back, Ethan had already packed Lily's school bag for the next morning, made grilled cheese for dinner, and folded the legal papers into the top drawer beneath the unpaid electric bill. Mason did not ask if Ethan was all right. Men who had worked beside each other long enough understood that some questions were too heavy to answer before sunset. He only said there was a place Ethan needed to see, and at 6:45 that evening, his old blue pickup rolled to a stop outside Ethan's house with one headlight dimmer than the other. Lily climbed into the middle seat with her plastic tool kit between her knees and a blanket around her shoulders. Ethan almost told her to stay home with the neighbor, but she had already put on her yellow rain boots again, and there was a kind of stubborn hope in that choice he did not have the strength to correct. They drove west past the shopping plaza, past the railroad crossing, past the newer warehouses with security gates and clean signs, until the city began to thin into old brick, chain-link fences, and wide lots where weeds had grown through concrete for so long they looked permanent. Mason turned onto Halpern Road and slowed in front of a building that seemed to be waiting in the dark. It was 3 stories of red brick and boarded windows, with a smokestack rising behind it like a finger held up to warn the sky. The sign over the main gate was faded almost white, but Ethan could still read the letters beneath the dust. Northline Components. Mason shut off the engine. For a few seconds, none of them moved. Everybody passed on it, Mason said. Roof leaks near the east wall. Main power has been disconnected for years. Back taxes scared off the last buyer. City wants somebody to take responsibility before they start issuing fines. Lily leaned forward, her breath fogging a small circle on the windshield. Is it broken? She asked. Mason looked at Ethan, but Ethan was already studying the building the way he used to study an engine that would not turn over. Most things are, Ethan said. That does not mean they are finished. The chain on the gate was stiff with rust. Mason had a temporary access key from a broker who owed him a favor, and it took both men leaning their weight into the metal before the gate opened with a tired scrape across the pavement. Inside the yard, the old loading lanes were cracked but level. Ethan noticed that first. Not the graffiti on the side wall, not the weeds along the fence, not the broken glass near the office entrance. Level concrete. Wide truck clearance. Drainage channels still visible under the dirt. The kind of details no brochure would mention and no investor would pause to respect. Mason unlocked a side door marked employees only, and the smell came out slowly, old dust, cold iron, machine oil buried deep in the floor. Lily reached for Ethan's hand. He gave it to her. Their footsteps echoed as they entered. The factory was larger than it looked from the road. Long rows of empty workstations stretched into the dim light, interrupted by support columns painted yellow at the base. A conveyor track ran overhead, frozen in place. At the far end, a roll-up bay door stood chained from the inside. Ethan turned his flashlight toward the ceiling and followed the ventilation ducts with his eyes. Industrial airflow. Heavy-gauge conduit. Reinforced beams over the central floor. Then he saw the words painted above a sealed interior room. Test Bay 3. He stopped walking. Mason noticed. What? Ethan moved closer, wiping dust off the small window with his sleeve. Behind the glass sat a silent room with thick walls, an old exhaust system, and a steel platform built into the floor. Not storage. Not office space. A testing cell. Someone had spent real money here once. Someone had built this place to measure things that mattered. This was not just a factory, Ethan said. His voice was quiet, but different now. Mason heard it. Lily heard it too. Ethan stepped back and looked down the length of the building, not at what it was, but at what the bones still remembered. A garage could fix cars. This place could build what garages needed. Outside, the city saw a liability. Ethan saw square footage, voltage, airflow, truck access, and a second chance big enough to frighten him. He did not smile. He simply stood in the dust with his daughter's hand in his hand. Listened to the silence until it began to sound like work. The broker's office sat between a tax preparation storefront and a vacant insurance agency on the west side of town, with beige walls, humming fluorescent lights, and a coffee machine that had burned the same pot for too long. Ethan arrived at 8:15 the next morning wearing the same gray work shirt he had worn to the factory, washed but still marked faintly at the cuffs where oil had settled into the fabric over years. Lily sat beside him in a plastic chair with her backpack at her feet, coloring quietly on the back of an old inspection form while Mason Reed stood near the window and pretended not to worry. The broker, Alan Pritchard, was a narrow man with careful hair and a wedding ring that clicked against his calculator when he typed. He had represented the Northline property for 14 months and had watched 6 interested buyers walk away after seeing the roof report, the tax balance, and the city compliance warnings. By then, he had stopped describing it as an opportunity. He called it a problem with walls. Ethan listened without interrupting as Alan explained the terms. Temporary lease with purchase option. Immediate responsibility for maintenance. $1,200 down. 30 days to prove insurance capacity. 90 days before the city reviewed occupancy permissions. Mason shifted his weight when he heard the number, because he knew what Ethan had left. Ethan did too. There was rent due in 9 days, Lily's school field trip envelope on the kitchen counter, and a grocery list he had already cut in half. He looked at the keys on Alan's desk. 3 of them were silver. One was dark with age, the teeth worn smooth at the edges. You understand, Alan said, leaning back, this building has been empty for 11 years. It is not ready for business. It may never be ready for business. Ethan nodded once. I understand. Alan glanced at Lily, then at Mason, then back to Ethan with the expression of a man trying to be kind without losing the paperwork. Mr. Walker, I am required to say this plainly. You are not buying a shop. You are assuming a liability. Lily stopped coloring. Mason looked out the window. Ethan placed $1,200 on the desk in 20s and 50s, bills he had counted twice before leaving the house and once in the truck while Mason kept the engine running. It did not look like much money on that desk. It looked smaller than the risk. Alan counted it carefully, printed the agreement, and turned the last page toward Ethan. For a moment, Ethan saw the signature line blur into something else, the red notice on the garage door, Claire Whitmore's cream-colored coat, Lily asking whether they were still going to fix cars. He picked up the pen. His hand did not shake. When he signed, Lily leaned over and whispered, "Is that ours now?" Ethan looked at the paper, then at the old key. "Not yet," he said. "But we get to try." Alan slid the key across the desk as if he was relieved to be rid of it. Mason exhaled through his nose, half fear and half faith. Ethan closed his fingers around the metal. It was colder than he expected. By noon, the news had already reached people it should not have reached. A clerk at the city office mentioned the filing to a cousin who worked in parts distribution. The cousin mentioned it to someone at Whitmore Automotive. By 2:30, Grant Keller was standing beside Claire's desk with a faint smile and a printed property notice in his hand. Claire read the first line, then the address. Northline Components, she said. He leased Northline. Grant nodded. With an option. $1,200 down. Claire looked toward the window, where the city spread beneath her in controlled rectangles of glass, asphalt, and money. For the first time that day, she laughed. Not loudly. Not warmly. Just enough to make the judgment complete. A dead man bought a dead building, she said. Grant smiled because it was the response he wanted. Claire set the paper aside and returned to her call notes, already finished with Ethan Walker for the second time. Across town, Ethan stood in the factory yard with Lily beside him and Mason behind him, fitting the old key into the side door. It resisted at first, then turned with a rough click that seemed too small for the size of the building. The door opened 6 inches. Dust moved in the gap like breath. Ethan looked down at Lily. She held up her plastic wrench as if it could help. He did not smile, but something in his face softened. That key looked like scrap metal. It opened the one door Claire Whitmore should have bought herself. The first light came back on a Thursday night at 2:13 in the morning, and no one cheered because all 3 of them were too tired to waste breath proving they were happy. Ethan stood beneath the central breaker panel with a flashlight between his teeth, one hand on the old switch and the other wrapped in a shop towel where a sharp edge had opened the skin across his palm hours earlier. Mason Reed was 20 feet away on a ladder, watching the overhead fixtures with the guarded expression of a man who had been disappointed by old wiring before. Lily was asleep on a moving blanket beside a stack of empty parts bins, her backpack tucked under her head and the plastic tool kit resting against her side like a small red suitcase. When Ethan pushed the switch up, nothing happened for 1 second. Then another. Then a row of industrial lights flickered once, buzzed, dimmed, and steadied into a pale white glow that reached across the concrete floor for the first time in 11 years. Dust hung in the air like weather. The yellow bases of the support columns appeared out of the dark. The conveyor track overhead cast long shadows. Mason looked at Ethan and gave one slow nod. Ethan nodded back. That was all. The factory did not come back all at once. It came back one switch, one bolt, one impossible repair at a time. During the first week, they cleared broken pallets, swept glass into 5-gallon buckets, patched the east wall with sheet metal Mason had traded for weekend welding work and dragged 2 dead compressors into the center bay to see if either one could be saved. Ethan kept a notebook in his back pocket with 3 columns on every page: safety, power, work. Safety came first because Lily was there after school, sitting at a folding table near the old-time clock, doing multiplication sheets while men twice her age stepped around extension cords like the floor was a map only Ethan could read. Power came second because no business lived long in the dark. Work came third because work, real work, had to be earned. Word spread slowly at first. A delivery van with a bad alternator. A farm truck with a slipping clutch. A retired teacher's Buick that 2 chain shops had refused to diagnose because the problem did not appear on their scanners. Ethan took the jobs no one wanted and solved them without making the customers feel foolish for needing help. He wrote prices in pencil, explained only what needed explaining, and never let a person leave without understanding what had been fixed. By the end of the second week, there were 6 vehicles in the yard. By the end of the third, there were 11. None of them were impressive. That was the point. They were plumber vans, county pickups, delivery trucks, cars with mismatched doors and tired engines, the kind of machines that kept ordinary people employed without ever appearing in a showroom. Ethan treated each one like it mattered because to someone, it did. Mason brought in 2 men he trusted, both former plant workers who had been laid off when the last part supplier moved south. Ray Benton had hands that shook until he picked up a torque wrench, then became steady as a ruler. Louise Harper knew old hydraulic lifts better than most people knew their own kitchens. Neither asked for promises Ethan could not make. They came because the factory had light, and because Ethan paid what he said he would pay, even when it meant leaving less for himself. Claire Whitmore did not know any of this. In her world, Walker was still a closed file, Northline was still a foolish gamble, and Maple Industrial Road was still moving toward demolition on schedule. But inside the old factory, the sound was changing. The scrape of brooms became the hum of compressors. The hum became the rhythm of impact wrenches. The rhythm became doors opening in the morning and closing after dark. One evening, Lily stood beneath the faded Northline sign with a marker in her hand and wrote Walker Works on a piece of cardboard Mason had cut for her. She taped it crookedly to the office door. Ethan saw it while carrying a rebuilt starter across the floor. He stopped for just a moment. The sign was uneven. The tape was cheap. The letters leaned. But under the new lights, in a building everyone else had called dead, it looked less like a child's drawing and more like a beginning. The hidden line was behind a wall of boxes no one had touched since the week Northline components closed. Ethan found it on a Sunday afternoon after rain began tapping through the weak spot in the east roof and Lily had fallen asleep in the office chair with her spelling words open on her lap. He had gone into the rear storage room looking for a dry tarp and a set of shelving brackets, nothing more. The room was narrow, windowless, and colder than the rest of the building, with old inventory labels curling off metal racks and a smell of paper, oil, and time. Most of what remained was ordinary industrial clutter: cracked bins, obsolete switch housings, rusted fasteners, a broken fan guard, 2 pallets of packaging foam that had turned yellow at the edges. Then Ethan moved a stack of collapsed cardboard and saw the corner of a steel cabinet set into the back wall. It was not freestanding. It had been bolted into the concrete and painted the same dull gray as the room around it, as if someone had wanted it to disappear without actually removing it. Mason was in the main bay helping Luis adjust the old hydraulic lift, so Ethan worked the cabinet handle alone. It did not open. He studied the lock, stepped away, came back with penetrating oil and a small pick from his old tool roll, and gave the mechanism the kind of patience he usually reserved for engines that had sat too long. 10 minutes later, the lock gave a tired click. Inside were blueprints wrapped in wax paper, a metal index box, 3 sealed envelopes, and a row of small parts packed in oilcloth. Ethan did not touch anything at first. He only looked. Men who fix things for a living learned respect for unopened history. The top blueprint was labeled Precision Load Stabilizing Mount, Series C, and in the lower right corner was a signature that made Ethan stop breathing for half a second. Henry Callahan. Not printed. Signed. Every serious mechanic in the Midwest knew the name. Callahan had designed engine support systems for endurance vehicles and heavy utility fleets before disappearing from the industry almost 20 years earlier. His work had a reputation for lasting longer than the companies that manufactured it. Ethan lifted the drawing carefully and saw the date, the tolerances, the old Northline stamp, and beneath it a client reference number that began with WAG. Whitmore Automotive Group. He read it twice. Then he read it again more slowly. Mason came in carrying a work light and found Ethan standing over the cabinet with the stillness of a man listening to something no one else could hear. "What did you find?" Mason asked. Ethan handed him the blueprint without speaking. Mason looked at the name, then the client code, and the color moved out of his face in a quiet way. This was theirs. Or made for them, Ethan said. He opened the metal index box. Inside were serial cards, production notes, inspection stamps, and a supply record showing thousands of specialized mounts produced for Whitmore's early commercial service fleet. The last entry was dated 11 years earlier, the same year Northline closed. Ethan went back to the oilcloth parts and unwrapped one. It was small enough to fit in his palm, dark steel and rubber composite, unimpressive to anyone who did not know what stress looked like after 50,000 miles. But Ethan knew. He turned it under the work light and saw what made it different: an offset internal sleeve, a dampening channel cut at an angle no mass-market part used, and a stamped Callahan mark so small it could hide under grime forever. This was not scrap. This was the missing language of a system someone had simplified too much after the original supplier disappeared. Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing one eye, her hair flattened on one side from sleep. "Did we find treasure?" she asked. Mason almost laughed, but he did not. Ethan looked at the part in his hand, then at the long dark room behind him, then toward the factory floor where Walker Works was still held together by borrowed tools and bills paid 1 week at a time. "Maybe," he said. "But not the kind you spend fast." He wrapped the part again and placed it beside the blueprints. Outside, rain moved down the brick walls in thin silver lines. Somewhere across town, Claire Whitmore was building a future on reports that said Northline had been worthless. Ethan now understood something she did not. The old factory had not been empty. It had been waiting for someone who knew how to read what dust was hiding. Claire Whitmore's crisis began quietly, which was how the expensive ones usually began. It did not arrive as a headline or a shouting phone call. It arrived as a warranty report flagged in yellow by a junior analyst who almost did not send it because she assumed someone higher up had already noticed. At first, it was 12 vehicles across 3 dealerships. Then 28. Then 61 by the end of the week. The issue was not dramatic enough for customers to describe clearly, which made it worse. A vibration under load. A delay in response when towing. A low, Uneven sound from the front assembly after long highway miles. Nothing that stopped a vehicle in the driveway, nothing that looked serious on a sales floor, but enough to make experienced service managers uneasy when they heard it twice. By Tuesday morning, the reports were on Claire's desk in a white folder with a red tab. She read the first 3 pages standing up, then sat down before turning to the fourth. Whitmore Automotive's new commercial fleet package was supposed to anchor the next quarter. City contractors, delivery companies, independent tradesmen, and small logistics firms had already placed orders. The marketing team had sold reliability. The finance team had built projections around volume. The board had been told the platform was clean. Claire turned another page and saw the phrase repeated in 4 separate technician notes, possible mount fatigue. She stared at it longer than she meant to. Grant Keller arrived 7 minutes late to the emergency operations meeting with a tablet in one hand and an explanation already arranged on his face. Supplier inconsistency, he said before anyone asked. We have seen this before. We isolate the batch, replace the affected part, and move forward. Marlene Price from legal looked at the warranty totals. How many vehicles are potentially affected? Grant did not answer immediately. Claire noticed. So did Marlene. Across the table, a young systems engineer named Avery Collins opened a file on her laptop but did not speak. Avery had been with Whitmore for 8 months, long enough to understand the company's rhythm and not long enough to be comfortable ignoring what did not fit. She had spent most of the previous night comparing the failed mounts against old service records, and one thing bothered her. The new part was cheaper, lighter, and easier to source than the original component, but the geometry was wrong in a way that did not look accidental. It looked like a copy made by someone who had seen the outside of a design without understanding the inside. Claire turned to Grant. How many? Grant tapped his tablet. Maximum exposure is manageable. That was not the question. The room became still in the polished way corporate rooms become still when people realize a sentence has changed temperature. Grant looked down. If every unit in the current fleet package is inspected, just under 18,000. No one spoke for 3 seconds. Claire set the folder flat on the table. Find the original supplier. Grant's jaw tightened so slightly that only Avery saw it. Northline Components closed 11 years ago. Then find their tooling, their records, their successor, whatever is left. Grant nodded, but his eyes had already moved away from hers. That afternoon, Avery kept searching after everyone else moved to scheduled calls and careful language. She found old purchase orders buried under archived vendor files, scanned badly and labeled worse. Northline Components. Series C stabilizing mounts. Henry Callahan design reference. Whitmore Automotive Group client code. Then she found something newer, a city lease filing from 3 weeks earlier tied to the same Northline address. Walker Works. Ethan Walker. Her cursor stayed over the name. She remembered it from a line in an internal property update Grant had circulated, a small garage cleared for redevelopment, a closed issue. She searched again, this time outside the company system. A local. Fleet Forum had 3 recent posts praising a new independent shop on Halpern Road for solving vibration problems no dealership could trace. One photo showed a cardboard sign taped crookedly to an office door. Walker Works. Avery printed the page and carried it to Claire's office at 5:28, when the sky behind the glass had gone dull and silver. Claire read in silence. Grant, standing near the window, read over her shoulder and went very quiet. This is a repair shop, he said. Avery kept her voice careful. It appears to be operating out of the old Northline facility. Claire looked from the paper to Grant. You said Northline was gone. It was. Apparently not enough. Avery placed one more sheet on the desk. It was a photograph from the Fleet Forum, blurry but clear enough. On a workbench beneath the Walker Works sign sat a small dark component with an offset sleeve and a shape Claire had just seen in the old archive drawings. The company that had shut Ethan out now needed a part only Ethan could build, and for the first time all week, Claire Whitmore did not look at Grant for an answer. Claire Whitmore arrived at the old Northline facility at 7:40 the next morning in a black company sedan that looked too polished for Halpern Road. Grant Keller came with her because he had insisted, and Avery Collins sat in the back seat with a laptop bag across her knees and the careful silence of someone who understood she had found something her superiors wished had stayed hidden. The factory looked different in morning light. The broken windows were still broken along the third floor. The bricks still carried old water stains. Weeds still pushed through the outer fence. But the yard was no longer empty. 12 vehicles were parked in marked rows near the loading bay. A county maintenance truck idled near the side door. 2 delivery vans waited with work orders clipped under their windshield wipers. A hand-painted sign near the gate read Walker Works, Service Entrance, with an arrow pointing toward the main bay. Claire stared at it through the windshield for 1 second too long. Grant noticed and spoke first. "It is still a temporary operation." Claire did not answer. The sedan rolled forward over concrete that had been swept clean in lanes. Inside the open bay, the factory was awake. Not polished. Not corporate. Awake. Industrial lights ran in long white rows above the central floor. The old yellow columns had been scrubbed down and numbered. Extension cords hung from proper reels instead of lying across walkways. A rebuilt compressor breathed steadily near the west wall. The sound was not loud, but it had weight, a layered rhythm of tools, voices, engines, and work happening in the right order. Claire stepped out of the sedan and the heel of her shoe clicked against the concrete, small and sharp under the larger sound of the place. No one rushed to greet her. That unsettled her more than rudeness would have. Men and women looked up from their stations, registered who she was, and returned to what they were doing. Louise Harper guided a van onto a lift with 2 fingers raised in the air. Ray Benton checked torque on a suspension assembly, his hands steady. Mason Reed carried a crate of cleaned parts across the floor and stopped when he saw Claire. His expression changed only enough to show that he remembered. Then he kept walking. Avery stepped out slowly, taking in the layout: intake desk near the old office, fabrication area behind a painted safety line, testing space marked but not open to visitors, inventory shelves labeled by hand and arranged with more logic than Whitmore's own regional warehouse. Grant saw the same things and chose not to see them. "Where is Walker?" he asked a passing technician. The technician pointed toward the far bay without stopping. Ethan was there in a gray work shirt, leaning over a steel table with a mount assembly opened in front of him. Lily sat 10 feet away at a small desk made from a refinished door laid across 2 filing cabinets, writing vocabulary words while wearing pink earmuffs. A thermos stood beside her pencil case. When she saw Claire, she paused, then looked at her father. Ethan did not turn immediately. He finished marking a measurement, capped the pencil, and wiped his hands on a clean rag before facing them. Claire had expected many things: bitterness, satisfaction, maybe a desperate attempt to appear larger than he was. She found none of them. Ethan looked the same as he had outside the garage, quiet, tired, present. The difference was the room around him. Here, his silence did not look like defeat. It looked like ownership. "Mr. Walker," Claire said. Her voice carried across the bay more than she intended. Several tools stopped. "Not all of them. Enough. We need to speak." Ethan looked at Grant first, then at Avery, then back to Claire. "About the Series C mounts," he said. Claire felt Avery shift beside her. Grant's face hardened. "You are using proprietary Whitmore records," Grant said. Ethan reached under the table and lifted a wax paper blueprint, still protected in a clear sleeve. He placed it on the steel surface between them. "Northline records," he said. "Left in a Northline building that your company abandoned as worthless." The compressor cycled off. The sudden quiet moved through the bay like a door closing. Claire looked down at the signature in the corner of the drawing. Henry Callahan. Then she looked past Ethan at the rows of workstations, the labeled shelves, the vehicles waiting outside, the people moving with purpose under a name she had dismissed. She had entered expecting a repair shop. What she had found was a company. For the first time since she met him, Claire Whitmore stood in a room where Ethan Walker owned the silence.